Hi, this is Eli Ochiltree of the SnoKing Beekeepers Association, and this is the December 18th, 2024 last monthly meeting of 2024. And we have a special speaker, Michael Duncan. But first, the announcements, because we can't skip those on monthly meetings. Uh, the new curriculum is the digital form is ready. It's in the process of getting mailed to me, and then people who need it and people who bought curriculum, paid for the class previously, you are entitled to the new updated version. So I'll start making up an email list, but you can always email me to make sure that I get out whatever certificate levels you have already finished. So if you're journeyman, you're entitled to have digital copies. Print copies you can have too, but they cost money. But you've already paid for the certificate, so I can send a digital copy for free. That will happen probably the mass emailing, because Karen's going to help me with that. Karen, who's on here, is helping me with all the membership lists and the financial statements, which we are working on. We took in less money than last year. We did teach fewer classes. 115 certificates, I think, is all we issued instead of the usual 140. We're more in the $14,000 income than in the 17,000, which all goes right back out again. So absolutely for the beginning of the new year, I will come up with something that just tells you roughly, this is what we spend on tech, this is what we spend on the manuals and certificates, and such like that. Give you a kind of a breakdown of where the money went. It's nice to know where your money goes. And Mike and Jen that are on here right now, if you want to email them or catch them in the chat. And I put Mike's email, I know, in the very shortest newsletter I think I've ever written, the one that went out this week. And I'll put it in again in an early January one, because all the classes are starting up again the second and third week or so of January. We are starting beginner, apprentice, and journeyman again. And Brandy Ickman is going to be teaching beginner, which I very much appreciate. I think that's all on announcements. So now we're ready to welcome Michael Duncan. And let me see. And Michael Duncan is the Michael A. Duncan, who got his master beekeeper through WASBA, the first graduate of the program. See him there holding up the first officially issued. It should say something like 00001 or something. I don't think it does, but it should on your certificate and the patch and with other patches. And so I insisted on putting these first slides in for introducing Mike. This is actually his presentation, but I wanted you all to know that he mentors tons of people, just so many people every year, and presents. And his other presentations that he has done three others there at the bottom of this page. Do you remember his language of bricks? How to put a brick to mark what you are supposed to do when you come back to the hive? If you missed that presentation, it's on our YouTube channel, Queen Raising for Beginners, in which I think he does the demarré explanation that he's going to refer to today. And Michael is saying if we get into demarré, that's a whole topic in itself. So at that point, I think that's what Michael's going to refer to. And then he graciously summarized the whole 2023 conference way back last year. Nobody's volunteered to do that this year. Any volunteers? Okay, so I wanted you to know he's done all those, that he's over in Quilcene. He keeps fantastic records and I guess, is down to like, he'll say 2 or 3 apiaries now, the home one, and like 2 more or something. But at times he's had a half dozen little apiaries and has spread his hives around the Quilcene area. Okay, I should let you take over.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Eli.
Michael.
Most of you here at SnoKing know me, but she did want me to put together kind of a short bio on how I got started into bees and what motivates me and that sort of thing. So anyways, my interest in bees started back when I was 12 years old. I grew up in Alaska and we had family back in Kentucky, Owensboro, Kentucky, my mom's family. And an uncle back there that I was just adored since I was in early childhood, sometime that we lived with him when I was really young. He lived in a cabin outside of town, and he had a couple of beehives out and back. We went to visit him, and I wanted to get my beekeeping merit badge, and he took me around back behind the cabin, picked up a couple of rocks about the size of my fist, chucked them at the hives, hit them, and the bees started boiling out of there. And he goes, "Yep, they're still alive." And he grabs me by the back of the neck, and we rush for the cabin before we get stung to death by these two batches of bees coming out of there to see who the culprit was knocking on their hive. And that was my first introduction to beekeeping. And the following year, I was able to bring my merit badge book and stuff to try to get him to work with. He says, "Oh, you don't need to know any of that stuff." And we went to go harvest honey, and then that visit was in the fall, and he goes back there, no veil, no nothing. He's got his grimy coveralls and stained white t-shirt that I think he left home in 40 years before, and flips off a couple of supers. And again, we have to run for the cabin because the bees are coming after us. And so we'll go out there tonight after they're all in bed, and we'll go get them. And that terrified me. Coming from Alaska, we didn't have snakes, and Kentucky has snakes, and I really didn't want to be crawling around in the grass back there behind the beehives trying to pick up honey supers with snakes out there. So that was my introduction to beekeeping. So we'll fast forward about 45 years, and my youngest son, who's actually out here making dinner, got tired of listening to me talk about bees for 40 years. So for Christmas that year, they brought out into the living room at Christmas Eve 2 stacks of beehives, suit, tools, everything, and um, let me know that both of us were going to be getting started in bees. So that was my first 2 hives sitting there, and got us started. So I've been a 6-year beekeeper. Uh, hit the ground running. I've reared queens, nukes. My first year, I went from 2 to 4 colonies, 4 to 12, 12 to 40. Ran 40 for about 3 years. In addition to my son's hives and mentees' hives, I had over 50 hives or more that I was overseeing. Got to be a bit much, so I've backed off. I'm down to 16 colonies. I've got 8 production hives and 8 nukes, and that's where I'm at with the bees. Self-studied a lot right from the start, and then participate in the WASBA classes, which I encourage everybody to get involved in. And those that are on here that know me, Jeff and Perky and a few others, I'm always pushing the WASBA classes and trying to get people to continue education. A little bit of what motivates me. I like quotes. I normally don't use scripture quotes in presentations like this, but there's two, being this is sort of a bio. One is study to show yourself approved to God, a workman that needs not be ashamed. So we're mandated to study so that we can be, accomplished or, at what we do. The other one is whatever we eat or drink or whatever we do all for the glory of God. And again, and there's numerous others that pretty much mandate us that whatever path we are on in life, that we're supposed to give it our best, and we need to study and take the initiative to really do the best that we can with whatever we're given to do. And for me, whether it's been an occupation or even a hobby, I've sort of followed that mandate. So I've taken to beekeeping pretty seriously and jumped right in with it. So anyways, that's enough for my bio. Our talk today, Eli wanted me to give a presentation a couple months ago, and I ended up getting sick and wasn't able to do it. But she gave me several suggestions of things she wanted to hear on, and really to do a talk, you have to focus one central truth or thing you're going to talk about. And honey production was pretty much the one that encompassed everything else that she was really wanting to put in there. Any one of the points that I'm going to touch on through this presentation could be a full presentation by itself, and some of them have been. And I'm just going to kind of skim over them as they are important in maximizing our honey production and after the talk today, if anybody has any questions on any of the points that we sort of go over quickly, then once the recording's done, we can have a Q&A and dig into it. Yeah, that picture there, the lower one, that's my son without the bee suit on. Yeah. I'm sitting here yakking, not watching the slides,
Okay.
but anywho, we'll stumble on another one here pretty soon. And so let's see here. Most of the beekeepers here, or that I know through the SnoKing, are second, third, and maybe beyond beekeepers, and could be wondering how to improve your honey production, or just starting out looking at it. So I'll be talking to those. Not everybody is wanting to maximize honey production. Some are happy with just what they get, share a few bottles with family, and not looking at creating super stacks of bees and working really hard. The principles for maximizing honey production apply to pretty much any hive product. Healthy, strong hives, it will, lots of bees. We're making queens, nukes, pollination, etc. The real beekeepers that I like to talk to are our first year beekeepers. They're the real dreamers. There's the ones with stars in their eyes and visions of jars of golden sweetness stacking up in their kitchen as friends and family shower adulation for saving the bees and reaping the sweet rewards. Not to mention they'd like to take a jar of honey home when they leave. So anyways, I think we've all sort of in that first year or two, um, maybe speak for myself, um, really sort of daydream about where we're going to go with it, and then eventually reality sets in and the work, and we lose a few bees, and it turns out to be a little bit more work than we first figured. So I'm going to give you a short answer. How do we encourage bees to produce more honey? And the short answer is basically just keep your bees alive. Control swarming, but don't split. We'll talk about that a bit. Know your nectar flow. Hope for sun, but not too much. So if anybody has to leave early, that's my talk in a nutshell. You've heard it. So these, let's see here. So we're going to just highlight each of these different things. So we're going to go to having a plan and setting goals. It'll be the first thing we talk about. And again, I like quotes, and this is one I picked up when I was a teenager, taking one of my first teaching classes, but as proper planning prevents poor performance. It's a whole bunch of P's in there. So proper planning prevents poor performance. So I encourage everybody to have an apiary plan. I made one for the first 3 years or so. And you want to evaluate why you want to keep bees, sort of like your mission statement. What motivated you to keep bees? What really turns you on about them? What's your focus? It'll help save you later on. So if you get discouraged, you're losing bees, you can always go back to your apiary plan and see what sort of motivated you to get started in the first place. What your focus is, whether it's going to be honey production, nukes, other hive products, propolis, pollen, royal jelly, you know, lots of things that we all can have different focuses on with our bees. It's not always just honey production, but all of these points, strong hives will get you all of those. So you need to look at the hive numbers that you think you want. I've had first year beekeepers, especially some of the homesteaders, think they were going to start with 6 or 8 hives the first year and build up to 40 or 50 the second and third year and supplement their homestead farm stands and stuff, and found out how much work 2 hives were that first year, and really adjusted the numbers quickly. So anyways, you have an idea of the number of hives that you want to maintain, whether you're going to maintain what you have if you're into it a couple of years, or whether you want to grow or whether you want to shrink, and have put that down on paper. Just have kind of a clear idea of where you want to go with your beekeeping.
That's
Time
kind of this one.
commitment. Pardon?
That's this slide, I think. As I said, the slides are kind of out of order. This one kind of
Yeah.
relates to that.
I'll let you
Okay.
keep up with the slides. I'm having a
Okay.
hard time staying with my outline here without actually reading it. So
Mhm.
anyways, yeah, so everybody's got at a different place in life. And so in your apiary plan, you need to look at your time commitment and how much time you can give to your bees. If you've got a day job and a family, you're not going to be able to give as much time. Your families come first. Beekeeping is just a hobby, so you need to factor that in there and how many bees you're going to be able to keep. And you won't really know that your first year. Those that have 2 or 3 years in will understand that quite a bit better and be able to make adjustments. My first couple of years, I was amending my apiary plan a couple of times a year, trying to figure out where I was going to go with it, what the bees were going to allow me to do with it. And that brings us up to once you know kind of an idea whether you're going to have 2 hives and stick with it, or you want to grow to 4 or 6, you need to put together the equipment, and that needs to be written out so that you're well prepared in advance. And a brother Adam quote: "The beekeeper is who is not a year ahead is a year behind." So when your bees are swarming in your neighbor's yard, it's not the time to be going and trying to find boxes. When your local bee supply place is closed for the weekend, you got a 50-mile drive to try and find hives. You're going to end up dumping your beer out of the ice chest and using that, or your kid's old dormitory refrigerator back behind the shop that doesn't work. You're going to be dumping bees in any kind of a box you can find. So it's good to have some extra equipment on hand. So figure out what you need for hives and then add a few more. I usually figure about a third more boxes and stuff that I keep on hand for storing, moving stuff so the kid can have dinner out here. So as far as the number of hives, we're always teaching our beginners, start with, 2 deeps, 2 mediums, and they outgrow that really fast. It's the starting point, but it's not where we're going to end. And if you're going to maximize honey production, you're going to need at least 3 deep boxes and 4 to 5 supers per hive. And for doing Demarest method and just having the room for the bees to grow and keep them from swarming. Drawn comb. I'll be touching on comb after a bit. Comb is king. It's where it's really at. You're not going to get any more honey than what you have comb drawn out for. So the whole goal is getting that comb drawn out. We're going to look at just a touch on types of bees. Um, if honey production is your goal, starting out with Italians, they tend to be best at building comb out, and they grow a lot of bees fast. So if you're expanding your apiary, Italians will really help you build your apiary really fast. They are poor at overwintering. They're not a good bee to keep just for a production bee. Caucasians, they're good for propolis, but they tend to be swarming. Brother Adam and his book on bee genetics and bees basically said all the good points of Caucasians are found in the other bees, and then they got all the bad traits that are dissuade them for not ever keeping them. They're actually rob pretty heavily, more so than Italians do. Carniolans, New World Carniolans from Sukobi, out of probably 280, 290 bee suppliers on the West Coast, WSU provides the breeder queens for about 240 of them. So the majority of our Carniolan bees are coming out of WSU stock. Um, and they're a good bee. They're good honey production. They overwinter well. They're well behaved. They tend not to rob. They're a little slow on building up at first, but then when they do, they go crazy. The other bee that is pretty common in our area are the old Sauls out of Oregon. They're a hybrid mix of the other 3, predominantly Carniolan, Italian, and then a little bit of Caucasian in there with them. They're pretty dark bee. They're pretty black actually. And I have success with I keep about half of the Carniolans, half of old Sauls, and I was talking with Eli earlier today, and it's like one will overwinter better one year, and then the next year the other one will overwinter. It never seems like if I lose a couple of hives that they're evenly split. It's always one or the other, and they're always going back and forth. So I can't really say which one is a better bee than the other one, but I do try and keep a variety of, just in case I do lose some, then the others seem to pull through. We're going to look at hive strength. Strong hives produce more honey, and you've heard, most of you've heard that in the beginner and apprentice classes. We usually don't go beyond that when we're teaching the class. So, but if you have a pretty strong hive, or say just two hives that are two deeps and a medium, they'll produce, the state average is like 37 pounds of honey. So say 40. And if you put those together, you would think you're going to get maybe 80 if you're lucky, 60 to 80. But the reality is the bees will produce, a strong hive will produce about 30% more over what two separate small hives will do. So keeping a pretty strong hives will give you a much bigger honey production. Now, not everybody's looking for maximizing that out, but that's about how much extra production you'll get out of keeping super strong hives. Swarm control is always forefront when you're raising strong hives. I use the Demarest method for swarm control. We'll get into that a little bit later. There's some slides that actually aren't quite real descriptive there, but again, I wasn't planning on going into a deep discussion on Demarest. So if any are new beekeepers and there's terms or things here that you don't recognize or know about, just write them down. There's going to be Demarest, there's going to be checkerboarding and drone mother hives and a few other things I'll be talking about, cell builders, things like that. Just write these things down and we'll discuss them after a bit. So one mistake that a lot of beekeepers make is that they start building their hives up too early in the spring. They artificially feed them. They're February, March, maybe April, trying to get them built up. There's quite a few of the older beekeepers that I know that are trying to sell nukes. They're splitting and trying to get those bees built up so they can sell more nukes first thing in the spring. The problem is that they've knocked down their production hives to where it's really iffy if they're going to get those bee numbers built up in time for the honey flow. And the honey flow just sort of lags along because they really don't have the bee power to maximize their honey flows. So I don't recommend doing a lot of heavy splitting early in the spring. The other downside of early splitting and stimulating your queens is you really wear your queens out sooner. They've only got a certain amount of sperm in their spermathecas. And if you push them, the harder you push them, the shorter their lifespan's going to be. You'll have a lot more bees early, but you're going to shorten their lifespan. So I tend to try to make sure they're healthy, but I don't artificially stimulate them to get like super hives in time for the maple flow. Um, one of the things that I use most years is with the Demarest, you can create a two queen hive, and this is really an advanced beekeeper technique that you can use for maximizing your bee power and increasing your honey flow. But it's not for beginners. You have to really be on top of them, or they're going to get away from you. If you think swarming is bad with one queen and a strong hive, put two queens in there. You're going to have more bees than you know what to do with. Next point I want to talk about is looking at a timing for the nectar flows. And I didn't put down any dates. She's got some pictures there for us. And mostly because even though we're all here in Puget Sound Basin, we have so many microclimates and the dates for the different nectar flows can vary as much as 2 weeks on either side, early or late. I know just within 10, 15 minutes of my house here, the maples and the blackberries bloom at much different times. In fact, I've got kind of a rolling nectar flow here So the sunny areas, the blackberries are getting ripe earlier than we have our main sort of season. And then some of these valleys up in the foothills up against the Olympics are real late in blooming. So I have a benefit of having blackberries and blossom all the way up in towards very late August, mid to late August. And then that overlaps with the fireweed. So we have our maples in the spring, blackberry fireweed in the summer, and then in the fall, I generally hear we just wildflower, but yeah, not in quill scene, the Japanese knotweed. I've only seen maybe two or three of these plants in the area. Might not know what I'm actually looking for at, but other areas will have different honey, nectar producing plants that will benefit you. So knowing the dates and the time of your nectar flow is pretty important because what you need to do is you have to have your hives built up right at the start of the nectar flow. So you have to look back. A brood cycle is 21 days, and you need those bees built up before the peak, or really before the start, getting into your nectar flow. Because at 21 days, your nurse bees are converting over into forager bees. And it's your forager bees that are going to be bringing you your nectar in. So you really need to maximize that hive strength before the nectar flow starts. And that you have to it takes some guessing because the nectar flow is going to vary from year to year, a week or so, either direction, depending on weather. But and then you got to control swarming and touch a little more on swarming here. So a lot of people, there's numerous methods of swarm control. You're going to have to split. And you're either splitting your bees, what I call horizontally, you're breaking the hives apart, or you split vertically and you're keeping the bees in the box, but you're just adding more boxes and increasing, the size of the hive, but you have to make splits to keep from swarming. And the Demarest method is the method that I use. Basically, it's a vertical split. Taranov split is another one that utilizes the sort of a vertical split, or keeping the bees in the hive, make them think they've swarmed without splitting off into other hives. But and he sort of stole that. That was a method that was 100 years before him, and I don't know how he got credit for it, but I think we have a presentation on that with Eli too. Um, so let's see here. So we'd already kind of touched comb is king, and that's something that you could write down. It's all about the comb. It's all about the comb. And I've got another Brother Adam quote here. It's the qualities the qualities a beekeeper must have, and that's optimism, patience, perseverance, and hope. And with comb building, it's really about patience and perseverance. You're not going to get that comb built up overnight. It's a process. It takes time, and you just have to take a deep breath and go with it. There are things you can do to enhance it and speed it along a little bit, but the bees are only going to draw it out however fast you've got, enough bees to do it and the nectar flow to do it. We've got some numbers to throw out. In our beginner classes, we always talk about, it takes 7 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. Okay, we always throw that out, but what do you do with a pound of wax? And generally, a pound of wax will draw a comb out on about 4 deep frames. So a box of 10, if you're doing 2 boxes, you're looking at 17 to 20 pounds of honey to draw out 20 frames from foundation into comb. And then if you're looking at your mediums, supers, you're looking at 3, maybe 4 supers also for, 40 pounds of honey. So for each hive, just to get your basic comb drawn out, you're looking at 80 pounds of honey. And once those frames are drawn out, that would be honey you would be harvesting and as production honey if you got the comb drawn out. And an example of that is my own situation here. I'm a 6-year beekeeper, and I'm still drawing out comb in my apiary. I've got 30 supers that are drawn out, which are drawn, and I have them checkerboarded with 8 drawn comb and 2 foundations. So the bees still have to make some comb. And for this next coming year, it's going to take 105 pounds of honey to get those frames drawn out. I also have another 40 boxes, supers, that need to get drawn out, and they're set up with 6 drawn comb and 4 foundation. And for the bees to get those drawn out, I'm going to be looking at roughly 280 pounds just to get those drawn out into comb. So total amount of honey for next year that I'm going to lose just drawing comb is going to be about 380 pounds. That's a lot of honey. So if you have comb, that's all honey that's going to be going into the buckets that you're going to harvest. So your honey harvest is going to be sort of a rolling harvest. You're going to start out and it's only going to increase as you get more comb drawn out. And each year the poundage is going to come up a little more, a little more. Ways to help get comb drawn out, regardless of what the catalogs tell you on how well they waxed your foundation, re-wax your foundation. Buy a couple of pounds of wax and get a couple of paint cans or a double boiler, something mucky from Goodwill that can melt wax. Anything beeswax touches is ruined forever. So don't use your best double boiler pan or something in the kitchen of your wife's or that you cook with. But get some old pans, set up a double boiler, and either use a white paintbrush, about a 3-inch paintbrush, or a small paint roller, and recoat those foundation out. The bees will draw it out much quicker. When you're putting the nukes, the supers onto, not nukes, but the supers onto the hives, set up a quart jar or pint jar of sugar syrup with a white lid with the holes in it, kind of a sprinkler jar, and take the 3 or 4 frames that are in the middle and just shake some sugar syrup onto them and put them in the middle. And that'll help draw the bees up into those supers much quicker as they come up and start licking and cleaning up that sugar syrup inside the supers. And they're like, oh, wow, there's a whole bunch of room up here. We can just start making wax and put that stuff away right here in place. And it helps speed up the comb drawing process.
Makes sense.
Another method of getting comb drawn out is to what we call under supering. So if you've got a super on and it's starting to get full and you go to put another one on, rather than putting it on top, which the bees won't come up and utilize until they've got the one below it filled up, you can take the one on the one that's partially full, take it off, put the new one down, and then put the old one on top of it. And that way the bees have to crawl through the new super to get to the one that they're working on. And just by tracking back and forth through it, they're much more inclined to say, wow, look at all this extra space we have. And that extra space happens to be right above the brood chamber where they want to put honey anyways. And so they're going to start drawing it out much quicker and getting honey put in there. So it's more work lifting boxes on and off, but it does help build out the comb quicker while you're in the comb building process. Once you have all your comb built, you can top super then, so you're not actually having to lift and shuffle boxes around quite so much. You can just put the boxes up on top. Checkerboarding, it's a term that you can write down, but basically it's interspersing the foundation in with the drawn comb. As they draw comb out, generally in the center, you can move a drawn comb out to the outside, move foundation in, get them drawn out. Checkerboarding, you have every other one. If you do more than 2 foundation together, sometimes they'll draw them out really wonky. They'll have more space on one of them, make it bigger. They can get a little crazy that way. But generally, checkerboarding will get you a lot more drawn comb. So you have to pay kind of attention to it and basically shuffle the deck and keep giving them fresh foundation to draw on right where they're wanting to use it. Eli and I were talking before this morning, and some of my hives are facing straight east, and it's like the south side, the side that's the warmest, is the side that the bees are drawing most of the comb on. So I got one side of the hive where they're drawing the comb. So as they fill it out, then I got to move it over to the north side where it's a little cooler and they're not working on it so hard, and move foundation over that direction and get more drawn out. So if you just have the bees in the box and you're hoping for the best, it's going to be a lot slower process. You have to take a bit of a proactive approach in getting that comb drawn out. Now, as a for myself, when I started with the bees, the some of the older people in the club were telling me that I couldn't split the first year or try and increase my hive numbers because we had to get that comb drawn out in those two deeps and hopefully a super or two. And I managed to get not just the two hives, but four hives drawn out, two boxes each in that first year. So it takes a pretty proactive approach. That first year you have to feed a lot, but you can get a lot of comb drawn out pretty quick. And with my hives, I had 20 production hives. I'm down to 8 now, but I have over about 110 deep frames of drawn comb banked up right now. That's extra. And then I also last year I had 70 frames of drawn honey that were banked up that I got filled up, and that was just the deeps, not counting my supers with honey. So if you take a proactive approach, you can build production pretty quick and get a lot of comb drawn out. So even in my brood boxes, every box that I have has to give me at least two new frames of comb every year. So I give them a couple of foundation first thing in the spring, and then about halfway through I give them a couple more, and that way each box is giving me about two new frames of comb every year. And that does come at the price of a few pounds of honey. So you keep that in mind when you're looking at a pound of 7 pounds of honey for 4 frames. That's 7 to 14 pounds of extra honey I could harvest if I wasn't drawing out the extra comb. Okay, the next point I'm going to talk about here, I'm going to get done actually really early, Eli. This is going quicker than I practiced it.
You
Not
can
all of your
always
hive.
explain demarray. I always say
Yeah,
that demarray stops people. They get, wait, what are you doing again?
yeah,
Okay, keep
yeah.
going.
No, when I sit there and rehearse it and practice it, trying to make sure I keep it in the time frame, and then it's like, okay, I got to cut this, I got to cut that, and slow it, speed up on this, and and now here I am, 15 minutes, well, half an hour into it, 40 minutes.
Mhm.
It's going along pretty good. So, anyways, not all of your hives are going to be production hives. So, people, I was talking about having 40 colonies, and my colonies were divided up. 20 were production hives, and 20 were nukes. And of those 20 production hives, not all of those are set up for honey production. You're always going to lose a hive. You're going to have a weak hive that you're trying to build up. You're going to have one that swarmed on you. That one's done for the season. So you'll get something, but you're not going to get much out of that one. You're going to have hives that are building up. So not all of your hives are going to be top production hives. You're going to have cell builders and those that, again, not sure with all the terminology. Is a super strong hive for raising queens, and there'll be drone mother hives. Again, those are for if you're queen rearing, you need to get more drones, drone saturation. So not all of your hives are going to be production hives. You're going to have some hives and or if you're raising nukes that are basically resource hives, and you're pulling frames of brood, cap brood to give to other hives, building your mating nukes. But you can use your resource hives for drawing extra comb too. So regardless of your apiary size, whether you have 2 hives or 20 hives, my recommendation is that set aside half of your hive numbers for production hives. So if you have 2 hives, set one aside that you're going to try to maximize out for honey production. And the other hive is going to be your resource hive for growing bees, drawing extra comb, and doing if you're wanting to actually expand your apiary for splitting and making other bees. And that way you've got some hives that you leave alone that are going to be your main production hives. It also sort of slows you down on growing too many bees too fast and not knowing your physical limitations on handling the numbers. It's easy to take care of a bunch of hives when you're making splits and getting started, but once they come into production hives the following year, you've got your hands full with a lot of lifting. So it sort of slows you down in that respect. Managing hives and supers, again, the Demaree method, we'll be talking about that some more. But any of your swarm control, it's not a once and done issue. A lot of beekeepers, they lose their bees, they swarm on them, and well, I did the Taranov method, or I did the Pageant method, and I made a split, but it's not a once and done, because those bees are going to be building up. They're going to double in size in 21 days. So you have to go back and you have to do your swarm control methods every 14 days up to 21 days. 21, you're getting in the danger zone for having your bees swarm. And with the Demarest method, so that means you've got to go in there, you should be doing every 7-day inspections, but every 14 days, you're going to be pulling brood out of the bottom box, moving it up, having the queen in the lower box with just a frame of brood to hold her. And all the nurse bees are going to go up to take care of the brood that you moved up. And as they emerge, you've got extra comb drawn out that you can then move back down during the next cycle. So you're always moving brood up and comb down for the queen. The queen's always got plenty of comb to lay on, and the brood is all up above. The bees think they swarmed, and everybody's happy. In the meanwhile, you've still got all your bees in the box, and you're starting to build some pretty strong numbers. But regardless of what swarm method you use, it's not a once and done. You have to repeat it. Okay. And again, the timing issue of that, having them built up, uh, starting about 21 days before the flow, so that you've got a maximum foraging bees, not just a bunch of boxes full of nurse bees. And that way it'll help improve your honey flow. Managing the supers, especially when you're building the big strong hives, they're not going to cap them all at once. So when you go in and do an inspection, and the Eli had that one picture there with that stack with, like 5 supers, 6 supers on it. You're going to go through those, and there might only be 1 or 2 frames in the top of the box there that are capped. And so you want to go through it every 7 days and pull out those capped frames, get them out of there, and it'll keep you from having a big stack like that you have to lift. So by the time you go through those honey supers, you might pull 1 or even 2 boxes worth of honey out of those, and reduce, which then you can give those bees more space, put empty boxes and comb and foundation in there and get them to draw it out. When you do pull honey like that, you want to get it spun as quickly as you can. So going and getting your extractor rather than borrowing a club one or being at the mercy of a friend or whatever, it sort of sets you back in timing a little bit. But if you can pull, if you're pulling honey during the day and you've got that evening, you can go spin it. Then the next day you can go get those empty comb that you've just spun out and get them back onto the hives and get them filling them up again. And it really speeds up your honey production quite a bit by rotating your frames like that. So you never will have actually a full box of capped honey until towards the end of the season. I mentioned under supering before, so that's an important aspect of also getting the comb drawn out and getting them to build them. While we're here on the hive management section, and I am ahead of on the talk here, I will talk about the Demarest method just a little bit. So with the Demarest method, if you're looking at this hive here, this hive is not, put
Whoops.
that hive back.
Get back there. Sorry.
Yeah, go back to my big
Back.
stack. Now
Okay.
this is not a Demarest hive. This is after 3 Demarasts, and then I made a split out of it. And I get tired of lifting deeps full of honey and bees, so I end up knocking it down or dropping it down into just the three deeps on top of each other with the supers above. But a Demarest hive, that bottom box down there, your first brood box, when you're doing the Demarest, you're taking off the second brood box, you set it aside, and you're leaving the queen in there with only 1 frame of brood, and you're taking all the rest of the brood out of that bottom box, and you're going to put it in a deep box up above, and you're going to give the queen as much drawn comb as you can. And again, I like to give them 2 foundation to draw out, and that gives the bees something a little extra to work on and helps me build some more comb in my brood box. You put a queen excluder on, and then you put a super on. And then on top of that super, then you can put your second brood box when you put all of that brood in there up in that upper brood box. Um, that way the nurse bees can continue feeding them, help them emerge out. I do give them a second entrance when I do that. I have a holes drilled in the back of the boxes with a cork in them. So the only time I use that second entrance is during the demarree split. And every 7 to 14 days, you got to go in there and do it again. Again, it's rotating the comb, empty comb and the top down and bringing the brood up. If you wait more than 14 days, the bees are going to start backfilling it with honey, and then you're going to end up with a third brood box that's really heavy, full of honey. But again, you can pull those and bank it and use it to feed back to them later. And then if the bees don't need it for that winter and season, then the next spring you can turn around, spin it out, and add it to your honey harvest. So it's good to have that extra honey banked up. If you go through a lot of the old bee books, Nell Grove and Laidlaw and Brother Adam and all those back, they didn't have Costco to go buy sugar whenever they need to feed their bees. So they had to bank honey aside. And for an apiary of about 40 hives, they would usually have about 70 or 80. So 7 or 8 boxes full of drawn, capped, deep frames of honey to feed back to the bees. And last year, that's what I had was about 70 frames. Uh, When I went to go get my bees out of the overwintering this spring, I still had anywhere from 1 to 3 frames of honey left in the hives, and I never had to really use much of what I had banked aside. I think maybe 10, 15 frames at the most, 18 frames. Each hive got 1 or 2 frames. What I didn't have to feed them very much to get them started in the spring. So I haven't had to sugar feed my bees in 4 years by being able to bank up some of that extra honey. But when you go to do your second demarree, that super that you put on there down the bottom is going to be starting to get drawn out and filled up. It may not be totally full, but it's getting drawn out. So when I do a second demarree, I go and I put the second super on down there and under super, and then put the one that's getting worked, and then the brood box back on top. And I always put a couple, oh, you can't see my fingers pointing here, but on the top there, I put on the first demarree, I put one super, and then the second demarree, I put a second super. We always
Okay, so
talk about, yeah, one that you
here,
start down there, and then I always put one up above it too, and right there.
okay.
So they've got, the first demarree, they've got 2 honey supers to move into. One thing that Eli is always talks about when she's teaching the classes is that for every frame of capped brood that you have, you're going to need 2 frames of comb for those bees to move out on when they emerge, because all those bees are in there vertically and they're going to come out and they're going to need to move horizontal across those frames. So you need a lot of space if you've got a lot of capped brood in there. So every frame of capped brood, you need 2 more frames of space for those bees to move out on. So you need to super early and you need to super often. And the way I kind of tell if I need more space in the hive is when I take the top cover off, no matter how many boxes are on there, if I take that top cover off in the morning, and maybe some of the foragers are starting to fly a little bit, but the hive is still just waking up, and there's bees up there on top of the inner cover coming out through the hole and kind of spreading out on the inner cover. I know that hive is totally full of bees, and they're ready for another box. They may not put honey in there right away, but those bees need the space, and that will help with your swarm control. And it also helps with getting more comb drawn out. So it gives them just that much more comb. The downside is that the bees won't cap the honey quite as fast. So you're going to have a whole bunch of boxes that are partially drawn. And again, that's where pulling your capped ones out and putting the new ones in. And then towards the end of the honey flow, then you can start moving boxes down. So as you pull frames out, you can move the ones that aren't capped down into lower boxes. As you pull capped ones out, put the nectar ones down, and you can start reducing the stack some and getting it brought down, and the bees will start capping a little quicker, drawing it out, capping quicker. So it takes usually two demarays, sometimes three to keep these big stacks from swarming. And where I'm raising nukes and whatnot, this is the time to make your splits. So if you want to split and make up some nukes, you've got that hive there full of bees. And if you pull out 10 frames of bees to make up another hive, or you want to make up two nukes, that hive isn't even going to notice it. You'll go in there, you could go in there the next week and you don't even know you've even made a split out of that hive. And it's going to be really strong and continue to make honey for you. Where if you made that same split in the spring, you wouldn't be harvesting hardly anything out of those hives at all because they'd be spending all that extra time trying to build back up for the honey flow. So for me, the time that I do most of my splitting for making up my nukes is at the peak of the honey flow, and it helps with the swarm control, and it also gives me just a lot of bee power to build up my nukes pretty fast. Okay, the honey harvest. We're getting really close to the end here, Eli. So she made up a couple of charts off my notes, and I just kind of had it as a sort of a spreadsheet type thing. And then she made some charts. Yeah, that one there, the upper left has kind of the chart that I made up. So again, you can see there in 2019, I had 4 hives. Three of them were dead. You know, I mean, we were just getting started out, and so I didn't have any honey harvest at all that year. The next year, I was able to go up to 12 hives. I was still using one hive as sort of a cell builder for making queens and building my nukes. And out of the 11, I had 11 hives that gave me a little bit of honey, not much. That's only 11 pounds per hive that I got. Again, the state average is 37 per hive, and that's an average. So a lot of hives aren't going to make you honey. Some are going to make you more. But I was able to pull 120 pounds of honey my second year out of those hives. I've got mentees with their four, 2 hives or 4 hives, and they're just, when am I going to get some honey? And their second year, if we're working the hives, I'm already got planned what I'm going to do with them, but we'll be going through the hives and they'll pull out a frame that's just one of those absolutely perfect frames with white wax cappings, and it's full from frame to frame, and there's not a brood anywhere on it, and it's just a beautiful frame of honey. And it's like, put that one aside. That one's yours. So, well, don't we have to leave it for the bees? I said, they'll make some more. That one's for you. And through the season, I'll snag a frame here and a frame there. So by the end of the season, they'll end up with 20 to 40 pounds of honey out of their 2 to 4 hives. And it just if you could see the look on their face, it's really worth it. And the bees will make up that little bit of a difference. So you can snag a little that second year, just because that's what it's all about. Is that's what you're wanting, is that little bit of honey. And still drawing comb out that second year. So the first year I had my deeps drawn. We expanded, so we had a lot more deeps to draw. I was feeding at that time to draw out the comb in the brood boxes. The honey supers you don't want to be feeding when you're drawing honey supers out, because you don't want to contaminate the honey that the bees are going to put in there with sugar syrup. So once you're putting honey supers on, you're pretty much done feeding at that point, if not even a week or so before, because you don't want any of that contamination. It doesn't hurt it. It's just funny honey. So year 3 of my beekeeping there, I had 20 hives. 14 of them were in production. The rest I was using for queen rearing. And of those, I was pulling about 40 pounds per hive, which I had a 679 pounds of honey. And yes, I weigh every bucket, take moisture samples and everything. I keep records. Obsessive compulsive with that. The next year, same number of production hives. And again, the honey production per hive climbed up a little bit, 58 pounds per hive. So now I'm above the state average. So the state average being 37, my third year, I was matching the state average. And the difference between year 21 and 22 was just having more comb drawn. It was just that brought the production up that much further. So I ended up with an 800-pound harvest that year out of those hives. And that was when I was getting ready to start knocking my hive numbers down. So in 23, I had only 10 hives in production, but having more comb drawn out, and it was a good season. We're looking at 120 pounds of honey per hive is what I pulled out of each hive. So for a total of 1,200 pounds of honey, which was a bit much. I did barely sell through it by the end of the season. I had to sell some of it in bulk to coffee shops and some home brewers and stuff. So I discounted a little bit of it and to get it to move. But um, and then really that's not, for around here as a backyard beekeeper, that's a pretty good harvest. I was talking with the WSU girls there at the conference, WASBA conference, and they were kind of snickering when I was talking about these numbers. And they're used to working with the commercial beekeepers there in Eastern Washington who have their hives on big agricultural land monocrops, and they're looking at 200 to 300 pounds per hive of honey production. And so they kind of snicker at us hobbyists with our 40 and 50 pounds of honey per hive. But I don't know of too many beekeepers that are in our club that even reach the state average of the 37, 40 pounds. There's one other beekeeper, Grant, that he's right up there with me, pulling 12, 1,500 pounds of honey off of his handful of hives. I think Tony does pretty good. But for the most part, most of the beekeepers aren't even getting close to these numbers. And it's mostly because one, they're just not getting the comb drawn out. They're not managing the hives. They're out there, but they don't really pay attention to them. They split too early. The bee power is just really low, and they're not getting the honey harvest out of them. And then the last one there this year, I had only 8 hives. I'm down to 8 production hives and 8 nukes. I use my nukes as my cell builders and resource hives this year, which I do some every year. And I had some serious health problems, which really um, took about 4 months out of my bee season, right through the halfway through to the end. And so my honey production this last year was only 78 pounds per hive. Part of that too was our blackberry flow almost got washed out on us. So the first half of the blackberry flow, we kept having those weather fronts come through, and we'd have a day, 2 days, maybe 4 days of rain, and the rain washes out the nectar in the flowers and keeps the bees in the hive so they can't get out and forage. And then the sun would come out and the bees would get out, but the blackberries are so saturated with water that the nectar they're producing is really watery and poor quality, and there's not a whole lot of it. And then another weather front would come in and it'd rain again. So the whole first half of our blackberry flow was on again, off again, rain. And I would say I probably lost at least half, a good third to a half of my honey flow just to that weather anomaly that we had during the first half of the blackberry um, flow there. So that took a bit of a hit on me. Another factor that's going to affect your honey flow is how many hives you have in the area. And there are some scientific papers out. Tom Seeley, a few others have done quite a bit of research, and 40 hives in an apiary is kind of the magic number. And it can vary between states and what your forage base and stuff. But if you start putting out more hives, you have too many hives for your forage base, your production per hive is going to go down. And here in Quilcene, for several years, I kind of kept track of the CSA farms and word of mouth, talking to people, who's got bees around here. And I was kind of keeping my hives adjusted so that we generally had with 40 hives within a 2 mile radius. And I was maximizing my honey flow by, knowing where to put my bees and who else had bees in that area. Uh, a little example of oversaturating or having hives where they're not oversaturated. I had my son's hives that first year that I took them over on some farm property out on towards the end of Beaver Valley Road, and there was no other hives within 3 miles of that farm. No, they own hundreds of acres, and so we had the bees out there, and I had one of his hives. We only had 3 hives that survived out of 9 when he got sick that spring. And I put one in as a production hive, and then the other two I used to build as hive numbers back up to 6. And that one hive brought in 240 pounds of honey that summer. It was absolutely crazy. There was no competition for those bees anywhere. And they were surrounded, literally surrounded with miles of blackberries and maples. And it just went kind of crazy. So I kind of suspected that Tony might have been feeding them for me too. Because the way the bee flies, it was 3 miles from where my hives were to his house, and he was open feeding his bees that summer. Um, I would hope that my production wasn't relying on him feeding. Yeah, he's shaking his head no. There's a little side story. Being I've got some time here. There was a beekeeper up in Canada, up in Vancouver, Canada, that was bragging about having like 280 pounds of honey per hive out of his apiary. And it was just a couple of years of this, and it was just phenomenal numbers for what everybody else was harvesting from their hives. And the local bee club there and the bee inspectors, they decided to do some investigation. Well, he was only about a half a mile from the Vancouver shipping docks, and they were conveying sugar, granulated sugar, into open warehouses. They had a roof, but there was no walls on them. And then they would load conveyors and load the ships with this. It wasn't even bagged or anything. It was just mountains and mountains of open sugar. So his bees had been feeding on this big mountains of sugar at this warehouse over the last couple of years to give him these super um, honey flow numbers. And of course, the whole buzz died off after that. It was like, oh, you're cheating. But it was just kind of a side story that I picked up somewhere looking at that. So again, it's easy, it's you look at these numbers on the per hive basis, and they're just climbing, with the exception of this year due to the health reasons. So your honey flow is going to improve as you keep getting that comb drawn out. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm in year 6. I'm starting year 7 at Christmas this year. I'll be starting year 7, and I'm still drawing comb out. I'm still building up my comb. So it's my in the when I looked at those numbers, I still have the potential of adding another 300 to 400 pounds of honey onto my end harvest once I do get that comb drawn out. So I've got another quote here that I want to add in at this point. As we're looking at, I've got that one year at 1,200 pounds of honey, 120 per hive. And again, it's another Brother Adam quote. It's the beekeeper's golden mean, he calls it. Beekeepers do not measure success by a bumper crops, which occur but rarely. The true standard of success is determined by the average yield per colony over a period of years. So again, that brings in the patience and perseverance in your beekeeping, because that 1,200-pound year that I had with 120 per hive, that could have been just a fluke or an anomaly for a really good nectar flow for our area. And this year sort of reinforces that by having our blackberry flow washed out. And when I was picking blackberries for winemaking years ago, there would be years when we'd have these really super hot summers, and the flowers would just dry out. There'd be no nectar in them at all. They was just horrible. And I knew I'd have a bad berry crop that year, and the berries would be all dried out. And so I've been beekeeping during those years, those would have been some pretty dismal years to be keeping bees with that super hot heat, just drying everything up. It's good to have, some rain, having blackberries that are by ditches, lakes, stream flows, stuff like that, where they're getting some moisture, really helps increase the nectar flow. So we can't really rely on that every year. So again, it's the average over a period of time that really measures your success. And while we do get excited over those big years and kind of have a little bragging rights, so the next year we put our tail between our legs and we just don't simply mention what we didn't get that year. I noticed in our club, nobody was bragging about any kind of big honey harvest this year. So we were all kind of just mum
Mhm.
about it. Last year though, we were all thumping our chest and crowing about how much honey we brought in. It was all a lot of fun. We're not in competition with anybody. It's just if you're wanting to maximize your honey flow, it's just going to take some effort. Those that are the homesteader ones that are wanting to supplement income, this is quite a bit more important than those that are doing it strictly as a hobby and want to give away some honey to family at Christmas and that sort of thing, and maybe sell a few jars. So the next point I wanted to touch on was mite control, the bad mite word. Big hives equal heavy mite loads. There's nothing you can do to get around this. If you have those super stacks of bees, you're going to have super stacks of mites. And it's frustrating in some ways and difficult because the FDA will occasionally change the rules on what we can use on the hives when there's honey supers on there. So there for a while we weren't allowed to use oxalic acid vaporization with honey supers on. So for me to treat during the peak of the flow, which happens to also be the buildup of the mites, I would have to unstack all those boxes, set them aside, treat my brood boxes, let them sit there for 15, 20 minutes so that most of the fumes could dissipate off before I start putting all my honey supers back on. And I'm only getting about a quarter, maybe 30% coverage on those OAVs because a lot of the bees are out flying. Half the bees are out there flying. A good bunch of the rest of them are all stuck up in the honey supers. And so I'm not getting real good coverage with the oxalic acid. So it's a way to maintain the mites, but you're not going to drop your mite numbers with oxalic acid alone. Formic Pro is going to be difficult because that time of year you've got some pretty high temperatures. So you have to stay within the temperature ranges of the mite treatments that you're using and really watch that. And given that it's that time of year when it is hot, it's your mites are going to get away from you. So as in the fall, once you do start harvesting honey and pushing those hives down, you really have to be checking your mite loads and treating. Um, we're here halfway through December, and I treated today, and I was finally the mite numbers on my hives are coming down. Now, just a week ago, I still had some hives that were over 100 mites on the drop board. Most of them were hovering between 50 and 100, and my nukes were all hovering about 40. I've gotten them to when I pulled the boards out to re-grease them and reset them for today. I think I had two hives that had 40 mites on the board, one nuke with 40, and everybody else was 10 or less. I mean, I had boards at 3, 4 mites, 5 mites. So here we are through December, and I've just finally got those mite numbers down. Again, that was due to my neglect from health issues in the late season, not being able to get out there. But again, these super hives, you're going to have super mite loads. So be aware of that, and you're going to have to be really proactive in your mite treating. And occasionally you'll lose a hive. It's I've had a couple of hives in the past that were running about 300 mites. I was getting them brought down, and then they end up robbing somebody, or maybe there was just a whole bunch of brood that all emerged at once. But the mite load one week was 300 and the next week was 3,000. And the following week I had K-wing virus, and by the following week I had half my bees, and 2 weeks later the hive was dead. They can drop that fast if you've got disease or real heavy mite loads. So you do have to stay on top of the mites and treat if you're going to be building up these super stacks of bees. I have a little bit of trivia. There's not too many of us old people in here. I don't know, maybe there is. So what do beekeepers and varroa mites and rock music have in common? Drum roll. Okay, for those of us that are old rocker heads, which I'm not really, but had some exposure. It was Pat Benatar. So Pat Benatar, she has, yeah, I didn't know she was a beekeeper, but she actually has a couple of songs written about, well, it's not quite Treat for Mites, but it was Treat Me Right. And it's a pretty catchy tune. And if you add mites in there, it's, yeah, Treat for Mites. And then her other one, if the mites are sitting there singing back at us to Hit Me With Your Best Shot. And really, I think that's really the theme song of the mites in these hives. So if you're not familiar with Pat Benatar, you can get on YouTube, punch her in on a search, put the song titles in there, and you'll be treated some classic rock and roll music from the 80s. I'd say maybe soft rock. It's not metal or anything. Um, so anyways, kind of a bad joke there, but anyways, yeah. Reducing hives for winterization. You need to kind of have a plan to get your bees pushed back. So as you're harvesting honey, and if you know your flow, especially that midsummer flow, you can start bringing those boxes down. You're going to have a little bit of a late fall flow. And I generally try to only have maybe two boxes, two supers on during that time. I want the bees to backfill that for their winter stores. So again, I slowly start working the hives down. You don't want to push them down too fast because if you've got a big hive with a really high mite load and you try and harvest too many supers all at once and you're pushing those bees down into the brood box, what's going to happen? You've got a whole bunch of bees. They're really crowded and they're really heavy with mites. And they're going to say, we're out of here. We're going to go find a new home. This one's it's crowded and it's dirty. And I have had hives abscond on me in mid to late September just because I was pushing them down a little bit too fast and too hard, and they were still too full, too dirty of mites. So I tried to bring them down gradually as I'm treating for mites, getting the mite numbers down, and getting the honey supers pulled off and pushing them down a little bit at a time, and giving as the summer bees are dying off, it's going to make room. The winter bees, they don't build up as many winter bees, so you're losing 500 to 1,000 bees a day as the summer bees are dying off, the queens aren't laying as heavy, and you'll see this hives drop alarmingly in numbers. And there's nothing wrong. It's the normal process of the summer bees dying back. But you want to kind of follow that natural cycle and not try and push them too hard, or you can end up with some absconding, and then you're starting from scratch the next spring. I've got one disclaimer here at the end. Building these super stacks, it's a lot of heavy work. And one reason the Demarest method has never caught on is that it's just a lot of lifting, and the commercial beekeepers it's that have to pay for labor to take care of hives. It's too much for them to run, the labor for doing Demarest. So rather than picking up 30% increased honey production by having these super stacks, is they would just soon rather run 30% more hives so they can just throw out more hives at them and pick up the honey production that way by increasing the hive numbers. A little side note here doesn't benefit us at all, but if you were to go over to Eastern Washington or Idaho and get a job with a commercial beekeeper over there, you're going to be assigned 1,000 hives, and you're expected to turn 100 hives a day for 10 days. They're on a 10-day rotation cycle, and so you're hustling. It's a lot of work being working at a commercial beekeeper. I haven't done it myself. I've done some research in it and talked to people that do and have, but yeah, they have to go through 100 hives. So their hive management becomes much different because they're not actually handling all 100 hives. They'll sample 10, 20% of the hives each day. They'll tip the boxes back and look for queen cells. And we all know that that only works so far. You're always going to have a swarm cells higher up in the box that you don't see. But if they see cells on the bottom, then and there's more than 10% of their boxes that have them, then they know they have to go through all the hives and do swarm control. Same with feeding. If only one or two hives are short, they don't bother. But if they're up to 10% or more of hives that need feeding, then they have to feed all of them. So their daily management, they don't actually handle all those hives, but there are times that they do. These big heavy hives, they're a lot of work. They're heavy. Only do what you can handle. Don't hurt yourself. It's a hobby. You don't want torn rotator cuff. Uh, pulling muscles in your neck, messing your back up, your wrist, anything like that. Don't get in competition with somebody else just because they're running 8, 9 box stacks. You don't have to. If all you can do is handle 5, just handle 5, and you're going to get a little bit less honey production, but you're going to enjoy doing it a whole lot more than trying to to go out there on a hot day in the middle of summer and unstack those stacks. And the one year I was up as many as 9 boxes. I can't handle that anymore. That's just been a couple of years. 8's a lot of work for me. 7 is comfortable. And I've got several of my mentees, especially some of the women and some of the older people that um, 5 or 6 is the most that they can handle. So when you're doing that, again, your honey production is going to be a bit lower. You don't have as much room to super to give the bees room, so you are going to have to do a few more splits, and that's going to affect your honey flow a little bit. But just be careful. Just work within your physical limits and don't try and push it and overdo it. And if you find yourself where you are at that point, then it's time to start knocking bees back and cutting your numbers down and just adjusting your whole bee operation. That's going back to your apiary plan, write it down, kind of keep some notes, and then for the next year, think about what you're going to do to try and either reduce your hive numbers if it's a number problem, or what you're going to do to control, not have to, use that many supers and, be able to keep the hives knocked down. So it's just a little something to keep track of there along the way. These big super stacks aren't for everybody. So that's what I've got, Eli.
Well, thank
Well,
you.
we're pushing close to 8 here, so we do have some time for Q&A if anybody has any questions. If they want to catch it on the recording, or you can stop recording. What do you want to do?
Um, yeah, and then there were so many things you said. I'm glad we recorded this because there was so much information. And out of all the like 20 different things that people could do to increase their honey production, everybody's going to have something small they could do, some little management thing they could do, like frame rotation. The bees put their brood nest more to one side, and so you kind of have to sort of move the frames over and put the frame you want drawn out with comb on that side, the south side or whatever side it is. I mean, there's a lot of little things. So I hope everybody's going to listen to this again because it had so much information. So thank you so much. Yeah, do people have specific questions? I was trying to just write some of the tips down too. I was thinking, wow, there were so many little tips in there. I can't see. Let's see. Can I see the chat? I may have to stop the share to see the chat.
I don't
Oh,
see
wait, there it
any in the
is.
chat.
Okay, nobody's doing that. People can just be brave, okay? Anybody want to be brave? If I
I love,
stop,
I didn't realize swarm control was such an ongoing thing. I thought like you did it once or twice and you were done.
uh-huh.
Yeah,
But
easily, because that's what most
everybody
people think, that it's a once and done thing, and then they end up losing their bees. And it's not. You have, they're still brooding up in there, so you have to follow up with it twice, sometimes 3 times, in order to keep your hive from swarming.
I
And you
think
need to,
that's something
and you
I
need
need
to,
to more about is I've never really had anybody teach me much about that subject, swarm
Mhm.
control in itself.
Yeah, I got it by just observation. I followed the club classes, and we'd make our swarm control, and then 2 weeks later I lost my bees, and it's like, oh man, what happened there? You know, you got to go back in and I'd do it again, and then I'd do it again, and it doesn't matter whether you're using a pageant method where, with I think if you're familiar with Rich Thomas and EJBs, that's his preferred method, but you're pulling you're pulling the brood out and you're setting it aside into another hive. So you're splitting sideways, and then once all of the brood that they can make new queen cells with are gone after 3 to 5 days, then you can recombine that hive back into your parent hive. So you keep the bees in the hive so it stays strong, but you've broken their ability to make queens, which stops their swarming for the moment anyways. And if you're not adding more boxes, they're still going to be crowded and they're going to want to swarm again. So then 14 days, 7 to 14 days, they're going to be making more queen cells. And so you've got to get back in there and look at it again and get to it before they make the queen cells, and again, make that split. So you can move bees aside, wait
Yeah.
until the brood is all, capped, and then do a newspaper, combine, merge them back together and add another super, add another box in there, give them some space. So yeah, it's an ongoing process. It's not a once and done. You have to follow up with it.
Thank you for that.
Hmm